Everyone thinks the villains of Vanderpump Rules are obvious, until you realize the creepiest one was hiding in plain sight. Rewatching Vanderpump Rules with fresh eyes reveals something unsettling. Peter Madrigal, once painted as the unassuming, grounded guy behind the bar, is actually the walking embodiment of workplace sleaze wrapped in a polite smile. The man radiates harmless, nice guy energy, until you notice the pattern of predatory behavior hiding beneath that soft-spoken exterior. Peter and Tom Schwartz share a similar brand of deception. Both present as funny, loyal, emotionally stable men, the kind you'd call refreshing in a sea of chaos. But once the charm wears off, what's left are two men whose treatment of women rivals the very bad boys they love to position themselves against. It's a type many women recognize all too well, the seemingly decent guy who weaponizes niceness as camouflage for selfishness and manipulation. Peter's behavior toward women at SUR is particularly stomach-turning. The infamous coffee date with Vale was nothing short of a setup, thinly disguised as casual conversation. His method? Encourage a drink, turn on the intense eye contact, and rely on practiced seduction tactics he openly admits have worked before. When that failed, he sulked, declaring himself done with the women at SUR, as if the problem were them, not his own sleazy persistence. The irony, of course, is that this man is the manager, yet treats the workplace like his personal dating pool. The issue isn't just Peter's conduct, it's the environment that enabled it. Lisa Vanderpump's coy, "Oh, Peta, you can't do that" routine is theater, not management. Allowing a superior to repeatedly date and proposition his subordinates without real consequences blurs boundaries and that's not flirtation, that's predation with a paycheck. Peter's type, by his own admission, ranges from Dallas Cowboys cheerleader to Playboy bunny, a laughable attempt at diversity that actually reveals how shallow his interests run. He's not looking for connection, he's collecting trophies. And when he isn't succeeding, he's lurking, hanging around the newly single women of SUR like a man hoping to cash in on heartbreak. Even the show's attempts to frame him as the sweet, safe guy crumble under scrutiny. Watch long enough, and you see it. The awkwardly leering glances, the opportunistic timing, the way he seems to mistake proximity for permission. It's not that Peter is worse than his castmates, it's that he hides behind the illusion of decency, making his behavior. His golly gee demeanor has long masked cowardice and complicity, particularly when it comes to the way he's enabled Tom Sandoval and mistreated Katie. The fact that he still inspires sympathy among viewers says less about him and more about how conditioned audiences are to forgive men who seem too nice to be cruel. In the end, the Peter Madrigals and Tom Schwartzes of the world are exhausting, not because they're villains, but because they insist on being misunderstood heroes. They demand empathy while showing none. They crave admiration while offering deceit, and they leave behind a trail of women who were never fooled for long, just patient enough to see the pattern. Peter isn't a misunderstood romantic. He's a middle-aged man still haunting the same bar, still mistaking interest for opportunity, still pretending that charm excuses misconduct. He called Katie Maloney fat on national TV and vanished from Bravo like it never happened. This is the story of Kevin Lee, the man who mistook cruelty for charisma. Kevin Lee's brief, spectacularly tone-deaf appearance on Vanderpump Rules Season 6 remains one of reality TV's more bizarre blips. The man appeared, insulted a woman's body at a public event, and then evaporated from the Bravo ecosystem faster than a SUR server's shift check. For context, during an episode centered on a party Lisa Vanderpump hosted, the flamboyant designer decided it was appropriate to call Katie Maloney fat, and not in a moment of misplaced humor, but with the kind of snide superiority that instantly curdles any scene. Even Lisa, who's been known to defend her fair share of eccentrics, couldn't save him. When Lisa Vanderpump thinks you've gone too far, you've officially crossed into social exile. Katie, for her part, handled the incident with more grace than the situation deserved. The women rallied behind her, recognizing that the moment wasn't just rude, it was deeply triggering. Lee's tone wasn't one of a concern or health-conscious honesty, It was dripping with aesthetic judgment and a dash of cruelty. Watching it back, it's not hard to see why the collective Bravo audience recoiled. There was, of course, the requisite apology, a limp gesture involving flowers and an on-camera attempt at redemption. It landed with all the sincerity of a spam email promising a free cruise. The moment was meant to soften him. Instead, it confirmed just how shallow the whole thing was. Lisa appeared genuinely disgusted, and her silence afterward was deafening. Lee never returned to Vanderpump Rules. His name, however, did reappear elsewhere. He popped up again on The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, doing what he does best, decorating lavish events and dropping sound bites that sound better in his head than out loud. Rumor has it he's still working as an event planner, though the Yelp reviews suggest his charm doesn't extend far beyond television editing. As for the storyline itself, some argue it was less organic outrage and more Bravo orchestration. After a rough prior season, production may have seen the body-shaming redemption arc as a way to humanize Katie and reset her public image. The strategy worked. Audiences softened, but it also underscored the cynical machinery behind reality TV's emotional moments. Kevin Lee faded back into the LA hills, perhaps still stringing up orchids and whispering, she, shy to himself, while Katie went on to rebuild her narrative, and more importantly, her dignity. One insult, one fake apology, and one vanished event planner later, the message remained clear. Some characters are better left off screen. Everyone's obsessed with Sandoval, but the real villain of Season 10 might have been sitting quietly across from Katie. There's a special kind of discomfort in watching Tom Schwartz pretend to be the victim of his own ineptitude. The Season 10 divorce dinner in Mexico should have been a moment of emotional closure between two people ending a long, bruising relationship. Instead, it became a masterclass in emotional manipulation disguised as mild-mannered confusion. Katie, exhausted yet determined, tried to articulate her pain. Schwartz, as always, clung to his favorite defense. I was a good husband. It's the same delusional self-certainty that allows him to dismiss her tears, then pivot, without missing a beat, to blame her for provoking Scheana and Raquel's betrayal. And the kicker? He just sits there finishing his dinner while she walks away crying. Nothing quite says romantic maturity, like polishing off your entree after emotionally dismantling your ex-wife. The Mexico trip was supposed to be the setting for Sandoval's early warning signs, but Schwartz's quiet cruelty was equally grotesque. While the world was busy dissecting Tom Sandoval's deceit, Schwartz was getting away with murder in plain sight, hiding behind puppy dog eyes and a perpetually dazed grin. His brand of abuse isn't loud. It's insidiously passive. He weaponizes incompetence, failing upward with a shrug and a self-deprecating joke, ensuring that accountability always slips through his fingers. This isn't new behavior. His pattern of weaponized helplessness has been a recurring theme since the early seasons. From the infamous moment he poured a drink over Stassi's head, an act he'd later repeat with Katie, to his insistence on not knowing when Jax cheated, Schwartz has always chosen the comfort of ignorance over integrity. By the time he stood at Scheana's masquerade party, swearing he'd cover for Jax but didn't know anything, his moral compass had long since rusted. Schwartz's genius lies in his camouflage. He sells emotional abuse in the packaging of aw shucks likability. He's the Peter Pan of toxic masculinity. Forever boyish, never accountable. Scheana hides behind performative empathy, Raquel behind wide-eyed victimhood, and Schwartz behind a carefully crafted incompetence that somehow still earns Lisa Vanderpump's praise. The sushi incident in Mexico summed it up perfectly. He sauntered up to Katie and Christina Kelly's table, grabbed food off their plate, and chewed through the tension like a man who'd never learned shame. He even made a silly face afterward, as if comedic deflection could erase cruelty. It's not charm, it's calculation. Every goofy grin is a smoke bomb meant to obscure the damage left behind. Even after the divorce, Schwartz continued to twist the knife. He publicly humiliated Katie at his bar's opening, then had the gall to call her family, When confronted at the reunion, he patronizingly claimed they were the same. It's an absurd declaration, unless he meant that both had endured years of his emotional gaslighting. Schwartz has coasted for years on the delusion that he's the good Tom, the affable foil to Sandoval's villainy. But peel back the diffidence, and what remains is a man every bit as cruel, only quieter about it. The public might forgive his failings as hapless or endearing, but there's nothing endearing about sustained manipulation. The tragedy isn't that Katie wasted years waiting for him to grow up, it's that the show itself still treats him like he might. Lisa may still have her Schwartzy, but the rest of us should finally call him what he is, a master manipulator wrapped in mediocrity, forever hiding behind a grin that has long since stopped being cute. He's not a pirate, not a playboy, and definitely not the prize he thinks he is. In the early seasons of Vanderpump Rules, Peter Madrigal could have been the show's quiet heartthrob, if only someone had staged an intervention between him and his hair. The long, unkempt mane was less mysterious bartender and more community theater pirate, a look that somehow managed to both date him and make him look perpetually sticky. Peter's presence has always been a curious one, perpetually in the background, occasionally leering into frame, like a man who accidentally wandered into reality television and decided to stay. There's something distinctly used car salesman about his energy. Overly confident, slightly too rehearsed, and convinced he's closing a deal every time he flirts. Add a dash of Johnny Depp's Jack Sparrow swagger and just enough sleaze to make viewers recoil, and you've got the Peter cocktail, equal parts charm and discomfort, shaken without consent. What makes Peter so confusing is the mismatch between reputation and behavior. Despite the questionable vibes, nearly every woman in the Vanderpump orbit seems to have had a brief entanglement with him, and remarkably, none of them have bad things to say. In a cast where exes are typically torn apart like fresh prey, Peter somehow emerges unscathed. It's either a testament to his quiet decency or proof that he's mastered the art of staying just irrelevant enough to avoid public backlash. Physically, Peter has his moments. In person, he's said to be conventionally attractive, tall, solid, occasionally thick in a flattering way. But whatever good looks he might have are undercut by an awkwardness so potent it could wilt flowers. His attempts at flirting often feel like an HR training video on what not to do in the workplace. The moment he starts circling a new waitress, it's as if every viewer collectively senses the incoming cringe. And yet, there's something almost tragic about it. Beneath the sleaze and secondhand embarrassment lies a man who seems more camera-shy than creepy. Perhaps his vibes are less predatory than painfully uncomfortable, a case of bad editing meeting worse social instincts. If he ever found genuine confidence, instead of trying to perform it, Peter might actually live up to the hot bartender archetype he clearly thinks he's playing. Until then, he remains Vanderpump Rules' most harmless form of sleaze, the nice guy who can't quite stop giving people the ick. This isn't confidence, it's cosplay. And somehow, Lala Kent convinced the world it was feminism. Few entrances on Vanderpump Rules have been as instantly polarizing as Lala Kent's. From the moment she appeared, it was clear she was less a cast member and more a chaotic performance piece. By season 6, her entire presence feels like a carefully curated illusion of bad girl empowerment, one that wilts the second you remember she's Lauren from Utah, someone whose idea of toughness seems pulled from a Fast and Furious audition tape. Her now infamous, "Do you want to get popped?" line to Katie was a masterpiece of misplaced bravado, an empty threat delivered with the same conviction as someone ordering an oat milk latte. The act is so exaggerated, it borders on parody. And then there's the baby bottle debacle, which, frankly, felt less like a quirky bit and more like a softcore sponsorship opportunity for her benefactor Randall. One has to admire the creativity, if not the taste. Lala's supposed power feminist rhetoric, "If you're hot and have tits, you can have all this too," lands somewhere between empowerment and commercial break. It's an odd manifesto from someone whose actual job history at SUR could be generously estimated at 3 shifts, total. The rest of her screen time is devoted to posturing and sound bites, a performance so transparent that calling her a terrible actress feels almost redundant. Of course, she's not alone in the realm of miscast servers. Billie Lee, Vale, and Dana each appeared with the same air of contractual obligation, faces that materialized behind the bar without any evidence they'd ever clocked in. But Lala, with her relentless camera magnetism, stands apart, not because she's authentic, but because she's so spectacularly not. And then there's Kristen Doute, self-described as fiercely loyal with no apologies. It's the kind of line that deserves to be carved into marble, if only for its comedic self-awareness. The tweet resurfaced around Season 3, and Katie rightfully dragged it back into the light, a perfect encapsulation of Kristen's chaotic sincerity. She may burn every bridge she crosses, but at least she sends flowers afterward. Finally, the great enigma of Katie and Schwartz's engagement. How does a couple so desperate to define their relationship end up not consummating it? It's not prudishness that makes it strange. It's the complete lack of chemistry disguised as devotion. After years of ultimatums and delayed proposals, the anticlimax feels like the most honest part of their love story. In a cast built on contradictions, Lala's faux gangster feminism, Kristen's loyal self-destruction, and Katie's tepid engagement form a perfect trifecta of Vanderpump irony. A world where image always outpaces reality and authenticity, when it accidentally appears, feels like the biggest scandal of all. What if James Kennedy wasn't the real problem? What if it was everyone else? James Kennedy has long been Vanderpump Rules' resident villain, quick-tempered, sharp-tongued, and allergic to accountability. Yet, Season 9 offered a rare glimpse of something resembling progress. He was sober, allegedly, engaged to Raquel, reconciling with his mother, and, against all odds, appeared to be finding stability. For once, the chaos seemed to quiet. Unfortunately, the people around him seemed determined to turn the volume back up. Rather than meeting his effort with cautious optimism, his castmates appeared almost eager to prove their favorite theory, that James can't change. Every minor outburst became evidence that sobriety hadn't softened him, and every provocation, often deliberate, was justification for writing him off. The engagement party debacle exemplified this perfectly. Brock and Shiana's decision to hijack James and Raquel's celebration with their own engagement announcement wasn't just tone-deaf, it was a masterclass in social sabotage. When James understandably reacted, the narrative immediately shifted to his volatility rather than the disrespect that sparked it. It's a setup so transparent it could have its own confessional segment. Lala's interference didn't help matters either. Instead of de-escalating the situation, she played chorus to the chaos, adding commentary where silence would have been the wiser move. The irony, of course, is that James's critics were behaving with the same lack of grace they accused him of lacking. Still, it's important not to rewrite history in his favor. James Kennedy has been cruel, cutting, and often deliberately humiliating toward others. His past behavior, both on and off camera, includes moments of genuine ugliness that cannot be glossed over by a few seasons of good intentions. He's lashed out when cornered, mocked others at their lowest, and often gone for the jugular when wit alone would have sufficed. Grace, as many of his castmates might argue, was not something he ever extended, so why should he expect it in return? Yet, the calculus of empathy on Vanderpump Rules has never been consistent. Jax Taylor, for example, managed to recycle apologies for years and still received the group's forgiveness on a near-seasonal basis. The difference lies in relationships. People liked Jax. They were once his friends. James, by contrast, was never more than a coworker. Useful when dramatic, disposable when difficult. Even Lala, who joined the show later, managed to forge real friendships, whereas James remained perpetually on the outskirts. His isolation only deepened his insecurity, which in turn fueled the very behavior that alienated him further, a cycle as predictable as a sewer shift gone wrong. So, yes, James Kennedy can be insufferable, and no, empathy may not be owed. But Season 9 exposed a double standard. The group's selective forgiveness, their eagerness to provoke rather than support, and their satisfaction when he inevitably cracked. It wasn't just about James failing to change, it was about everyone else making sure he never got the chance to prove he could. What if Tom Sandoval wasn't the real villain of Vanderpump Rules, and we've been cheering for the wrong monster all along? Rewatching Vanderpump Rules Season 11. With some distance and a dash of adulthood reveals a fascinating twist. Perhaps the collective fury toward Tom Sandoval was misallocated. Yes, he cheated on his long-term partner, and yes, it was sleazy, public, and humiliating. But let's not kid ourselves. Infidelity, however disgraceful, is hardly the summit of depravity in a cast where physical abuse, manipulation, and delusion run rampant. For years, Ariana was Sandoval's fiercest defender, excusing tantrums that would have embarrassed a toddler at Stassi's book signing. When the scandal broke, the moral pitchforks came out as though he'd burned down sewer. Yet, if we're being honest, there are far darker characters lurking in the same frame. James Kennedy, for instance, remains the show's most glaring hypocrisy, a man with documented allegations of abuse, both from Kristen and later confirmed by Allie's police reports, somehow skating by as the comic relief. The true villainy lies there, not in Sandoval's garden variety betrayal. That said, Sandoval hardly deserves sainthood. Secretly recording Raquel without her consent was grotesque, a violation that rightfully landed him in legal trouble. Even worse was weaponizing Ariana's mental health struggles when convenient, a stunt both cowardly and calculated. Redemption arcs typically require remorse. His seemed more like rebranding. As for Shiana, the ever-slippery narrator of her own innocence, the supposed affair that conveniently surfaced just in time for a book launch reads more like strategic fiction than scandal. Still, in this rare instance, her version of events regarding Raquel's recording holds up, shockingly credible, considering her usual elasticity with the truth. In the end, Season 11 wasn't a study in good versus evil. It was a masterclass in misplaced outrage. The wrong man became the effigy, while the real monsters stayed hidden in plain sight, sipping cocktails and thanking Bravo for the distraction.